Iran had oil, a parliament, and a prime minister with real popular support. The CIA had $1 million and one officer in Tehran, Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of a president. 4 days later, he stood in the palace shaking hands with a Shah who had fled the country 72 hours before. The official story calls it Cold War geopolitics, fear of communism, a necessary intervention. The numbers tell a different story. In 1950, Britain earned 3 times more from Iranian oil than Iran did, from Iran's own ground, pumped by Iranian workers. Before the coup, American oil companies had 0% of Iran. After, 40. And 26 years later, Ayatollah Khomeini will point directly to 1953 as proof that the West cannot be trusted. What follows is an anatomy of a mechanism: how you break a democracy without firing a shot. Cut off the money. Manufacture chaos. Call it the will of the people. At the end, a receipt. Who took control? What percentage? By name. March 15, 1951. The Majlis votes unanimous. April 28. Mossadegh becomes prime minister. May 1st, the nationalization law is signed. Iran's oil no longer belongs to the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. It belongs to Iran. That evening, British Foreign Secretary Herbert Morrison received the cable in London. The word was already spreading through Whitehall: nationalization. The Attlee cabinet convened. The formal response would take months. The decision was immediate. This was the moment Iran said, "Enough," and it was the moment the response began to be planned. The next day, Tehran went into the streets. Not on orders, on its own. Students carried portraits of Mossadegh. Oil field workers in Abadan stopped work and listened to the radio. One of them would tell a journalist, "For the first time, I feel this oil is mine." In Abadan, British engineers at the world's largest refinery packed their suitcases. Eric Drake, AIOC's local director, received the order: hand over operations. He complied. He had no choice. A week later, Britain filed a case at the International Court of Justice. At the same time, there was an order to the fleet. The cruiser HMS Mauritius took position off Iran's coast. Officially, it was to protect British citizens. Unofficially, it was a signal. Winston Churchill, still not prime minister but already influential, said in Parliament, "This is not nationalization. This is robbery, and robbers must be punished." To understand why Iran stood on the edge in 1953, you first have to see what a rare moment actually happened at the start of the 1950s. In a country long treated as a chessboard for other empires, a politician appeared who spoke not in slogans, but in logic. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. He was 69, led meetings from bed, and cried in public speeches. The West called him an eccentric. Iranians saw something else: a man who finally stopped pretending. Here's a question worth holding on to. What happens when a man like this goes up against an empire that controls not just oil, but the entire system that turns oil into money? You're about to see. He was not a field commander, not a fanatic, not a revolutionary leader. He was a lawyer and a parliamentarian, a man of procedure, a man of law. He had one weakness: not political, not economic, structural. You'll see it in the exact moment he could have won, and chose not to. That is exactly why his story is dangerous. It shows that even a democratic path can end the same way if it crosses someone else's cash register. Mossadegh rose on an idea so obvious it almost sounds harmless. If the oil is extracted here, if the land is here, if the workers are here, then why does the main profit not stay here? For Iran, oil was not a symbol of progress. It was a key to the state's survival. It was the currency of the future: roads, schools, hospitals, an army, institutions. In that sense, nationalization was not radicalism. Under the 1933 agreement, Iran received roughly 16 to 20% of net profits. By comparison, Venezuela and Saudi Arabia had already negotiated 50-50 deals. Mossadegh was just catching up. But normal depends on who writes the rules. Before nationalization, the country's largest oil asset was controlled by a company the world knew as the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the future BP. Inside Iran, it was not experienced as a partnership. It was experienced as humiliation. Here is one number that explains everything. In 1950, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company paid £50.5 million in taxes to the British Treasury. That same year, Iran received £16 million in royalties. Britain earned 3 times more from Iranian oil than Iran itself. Let that sink in. Britain made more money from Iranian oil than Iran did, from Iran's own ground, pumped by Iranian workers. Picture a country that has the resource but not the feeling. The resource truly belongs to it. And that is not an emotional metaphor. That feeling becomes policy when people see the gap between what is extracted and how the country lives around the wells and the factories. Mossadegh did not arrive with a dream of punishing the West. He arrived with a task: restore control over revenue and rewrite the rules so Iran would stop being a tenant on its own land. Nationalization was a legal act. Parliament votes, the state declares oil a national asset. On paper, it looks like democracy and sovereignty winning. And at first, that is how it felt. A victory. For millions, it was a rare moment of national dignity. Not a request, but a decision. Not a bow, but a signature. Mossadegh did not lose immediately. He was not swept away overnight. He held support. He was popular. He was legitimate. When a leader has legitimacy, you cannot simply fire him from the outside. So a different kind of fight begins. A fight over the environment, so that legitimacy stops mattering. Remember this: Mossadegh didn't lose because he nationalized oil. He lost because he didn't control what mattered more than oil. You'll see what that was. The mistake was thinking nationalization automatically gives you power. Meanwhile, one American officer was already in Tehran, watching. His name will matter in 4 days. At first, it can seem like nothing terrible is happening. The economy still holds. The street is still calm. The government still feels confident. But in stories like this, time works against anyone who does not control the system. And when that becomes obvious, the clock is already running. The first move was not a bullet. It was a ledger. November 1952. Washington. MI6 officer Christopher Woodhouse arrives with a proposal: remove Mossadegh. He meets Kermit Roosevelt and Donald Wilbur at CIA headquarters. Truman's White House says no. But in January 1953, Eisenhower takes office and brings John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State, his brother Allen Dulles as CIA Director. By July 11, 1953, Eisenhower approves. The operation is green-lit. Code names: Boot for the British, Ajax for the Americans. The plan is blunt: buy newspapers, create the feeling of chaos; buy a crowd, create violence in the streets; buy generals, ensure the arrest. The budget is $1 million. For context, $1 million in 1953 is roughly $11 million today. That's what it cost to overthrow a democracy. Less than a single fighter jet. Remember these numbers. At the end, you'll see exactly what that money bought. A receipt with names and percentages. Out of that, $150,000 for newspapers and pamphlets, $100,000 for street fighters and protesters, and the rest for what actually decides outcomes: intermediaries, bribes, logistics, safe houses, and the invisible work that turns a society into a lever. But to understand why this plan could work at all, you have to see what happened before the first bill was ever handed to the first paid mob. After the nationalization, the conflict stopped being legal and became economic. The pressure was not aimed at the government directly, but at the environment in which that government had to exist. Britain did not respond with screaming threats. It responded with infrastructure. Iran's oil now belonged to Iran, but it could not be turned into money. A boycott began, and one Italian captain was about to learn how it worked. June 1952. The Italian tanker Rosemary leaves the Iranian port of Bandar Mashur with 950 tons of crude. The captain knows about the risks, but the price is good, and Italian law is not British law. The tanker will not reach Italy. In the Gulf of Aden, a British warship is waiting. The demand, stop. The arrest follows. The vessel is seized. The cargo, confiscated under an AIOC injunction, filed in Aden's colonial court. The captain will be released. The oil will not. After Rosemary, no tanker enters an Iranian port. Meanwhile, oil production in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia quietly increased to fill the gap Iran left behind. Insurance companies refuse coverage. Ship owners stop answering calls. After Rosemary, tankers do not come. Insurers refuse. Buyers go silent. Oil sits in the tanks. Money does not arrive. The world never announced a blockade against Iran, but the blockade worked. Before nationalization, Iran exported roughly 660,000 barrels per day at around $2.50 per barrel. After the boycott, exports fell to nearly zero. Annual revenue loss, approximately $400 million. By mid-1953, Iran's foreign currency reserves, once around $130 million, were almost gone. The oil remained in storage. Revenue fell. The budget began to crack. People do not live in statistics. They live in expectations. When expectations fail, support starts to melt. This is where the official version of the story introduces a convenient explanation, that Mossadegh supposedly mismanaged the economy, and that the crisis was the result of his stubbornness. But the crisis was not the problem of one politician. It was the question of sovereignty itself. Inside the country, polarization grows. Some say, we must go to the end. Otherwise, we lose everything. Others say, we must step back. Otherwise, we lose the country. Mossadegh tried negotiating. The company refused. They wanted everything back. He went to the UN. The court said it had no jurisdiction. Finally, he offered American companies a share, hoping Washington would switch sides. The State Department told them, stay out. Every legal door was locked, and not by accident. Mossadegh played by the rules. The problem was that the rules were written by others and could be rewritten while the game was still going. By spring 1953, all legal exits were closed, and somewhere in London, a file was already open. Codename Boot. But pressure is not a coup. A coup requires a trigger and a moment when the target makes a mistake. That moment will come in August, in 4 days. Internal CIA assessments warned that Mossadegh remained popular and the operation might fail. The warnings were noted and overruled. These assessments surfaced in the CIA's own declassified history, released in 2013. The Dulles brothers had one argument that closed all debates. If we don't do it, the Soviets will. What you're about to see took 4 days, and the operation begins with a failure. August 15, 1953. Tehran, 11:45 p.m. Colonel Nematollah Nassiri arrives at Mossadegh's residence with a royal decree. The paper orders the Prime Minister's dismissal. The signature belongs to the Shah. The plan is simple. Arrest Mossadegh, install a new Prime Minister, announce the change on the radio before dawn. By morning, the country is supposed to wake up to a new reality. It does not work. Mossadegh has been warned. Nassiri is arrested instead. The officers sent to seize key buildings hesitate. Some refuse. Others disappear. By sunrise, the operation has collapsed. The Shah panics. By dawn on August 16th, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi boards a plane. First Baghdad, then Rome on August 18th. Officially, it is called a temporary vacation. In reality, it is an escape. Tehran wakes up to shocking news. The king has fled. For a brief moment, history holds its breath. Mosaddegh goes on the radio. He announces that an attempted coup has failed, that the constitution has been violated, that the army must remain neutral, that order must be preserved. Crowds pour into the streets, not against him, but for him. They tear down portraits of the Shah. They chant Mossadegh's name. Some shout a word that has not been spoken openly before: Republic. This is the moment when everything could tip, because Mossadegh has options. He could strike first, arrest the royalist generals, purge the units that just tried to remove him, seize the levers of communication, and ensure there is no second attempt. He does not do it. Instead, he chooses restraint. He trusted the law. The law did not return the favor. That belief will cost him everything. Inside the CIA station in Tehran, panic sets in. Washington receives the message: Operation Ajax has failed. The field officers prepare to leave. Some begin destroying documents. Washington cables Roosevelt, abort. He later described what happened next in his 1979 memoir, Counter-Coup. He ignored the order. Declassified CIA documents confirm it. And then he makes a decision on his own. He does not leave. He stays and improvises. He has roughly $100,000 left. That's about $1.1 million today. On a country of 18 million people. He spends it in 48 hours. Street bosses, clerics, editors. Every envelope is a small betrayal bought in cash. The narrative flips overnight. What was a failed coup becomes, in the press, a popular uprising against chaos. What was an illegal royal decree becomes the Shah's lawful authority. What was the flight of a monarch becomes a necessary step to avoid bloodshed. Paid crowds appear in the streets. At first, they do not even chant Mossadegh's name. They chant about bread, about prices, about disorder, about fear. Then violence begins. Hired men attack newspaper offices loyal to Mossadegh, so that photographs of destruction can run the same evening. Police units receive conflicting orders. Some stand aside. Some join in. Army units that hesitated 4 days earlier now receive clear instructions and cash. By midday, the balance shifts. This time, tanks do move. Radio Tehran is taken. The broadcast changes tone. Mossadegh's supporters hear their leader called a dictator. The Shah is named the only source of stability. By evening, Mossadegh's house is under artillery fire. He escapes over a garden wall, a 71-year-old man in his pajamas. The man who refused to use force is now hunted by it. Within hours, the coup that had failed is declared a success. This script worked, so well that within 12 months it would be copied, on another continent, against another elected leader. The Shah will return days later to cheering crowds carefully arranged for cameras. Washington will describe the events as the restoration of constitutional order. He will rule for 26 years. And the ending will echo 1953 in ways no one in that palace could imagine. But watch what actually happened in those 4 days. The first attempt failed because the country did not accept it. The second attempt succeeded because the environment was reshaped. Fast, money in the streets, headlines in the morning, confusion in the chain of command, fear on the corners, and then the sudden appearance of spontaneous order. Mossadegh did not fall because he had no support. He fell because in a crisis like this, support is not enough, if the other side is willing to ignore the rules first. The coup took 4 days. What followed would take 26 years and end in a revolution that still shapes the world today. After the coup, there is no chaos. There are no mass arrests in the streets, no public executions, no revolutionary tribunals, no dramatic purge that would make the break obvious. What follows is quieter and far more durable. First comes the trial, November 8, 1953, a military tribunal. The charge is not corruption, not treason, but defying the Shah's royal decree. The same constitution Mossadegh tried to protect is now used against him. December 21st. Guilty. 3 years in prison. Then house arrest for life. No speeches, no last words, no martyrdom. He will spend his last years forbidden to speak. Want to know where he's buried? In his own living room. The government wouldn't allow a public grave. No monument, no street, no mention in school books for decades. Just a grave in a house that no one was allowed to visit. The man who nearly dismantled the oil empire disappears, not into legend, but into silence. The cleanup was surgical. Generals who hesitated retired. Newspapers that supported Mossadegh shut or sold. One editor who wrote The Shah Fled was never published again. The word nationalization disappeared from headlines as if it had never been spoken. Politics continued to exist, but it stopped deciding anything. Elections still happened. They just stopped meaning anything. And then comes the real objective. September 19, 1954. A new oil agreement is signed. Officially, it is presented as a compromise. Iran regains control. Profits are to be shared. The language sounds balanced, reasonable, modern, but the structure tells the truth. A consortium replaces the old monopoly. British Petroleum keeps the largest share. American companies enter in force. Royal Dutch Shell takes a portion. French interests receive a slice. This is why the coup did what boycotts and lawsuits could not. It restored predictable contracts. It reopened access to markets. It reassured the companies that Iran would no longer be allowed to rewrite the rules. Then the political system is rebuilt around one idea: prevent uncertainty. The Shah returns, not as a constitutional monarch but as the center of power. Parliament weakens. Courts lose independence. The security services expand. A new intelligence agency is created, SAVAK. Its purpose is not to win popularity. Its purpose is to make opposition risky, so risky that people stop speaking out loud. Dissent does not vanish. It goes underground. And when politics becomes something you whisper about, anger has nowhere to go except inward until it turns into pressure. For years, the country will look stable. Oil flows, revenues grow. The Shah modernizes roads, universities, industry, weapons. But underneath, resentment without a legal outlet. That pressure will find its exit. And that is how a system can seem secure, right up until it breaks. 1954. The Consortium. 40% Britain, 40% America. 1957. SAVAK is created. The CIA sends Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., father of the future Gulf War general, to help train it. 1963. The Shah modernizes. Opposition underground. 1979. Explosion. Khomeini at the podium. Remember 1953. The West always betrays. 26 years from coup to revolution. The shadow falls across everything. Mossadegh dies under house arrest in 1967. His grave is in the living room of his own home. Kermit Roosevelt leaves the CIA and becomes a consultant for oil companies. The same ones. He titled his memoir Counter-Coup, not Coup. The framing matters. His clients after the CIA included Gulf Oil, one of the 5 American companies that got 40% of Iran. The grandson of a trust-busting president helped build an oil cartel. The Shah rules for 26 years and flees in 1979. He dies in exile. The irony is hard to miss. The man overthrown for nationalizing oil becomes a symbol, and the people who removed him are largely forgotten. But the main lesson is not learned in Tehran. The main lesson is learned in Washington and in London. Iran wasn't an exception. It was a pilot program. A year later, June 1954, Guatemala. President Arbenz nationalized land owned by United Fruit. Same script, economic pressure, bought press, convenient generals. The CIA even recycled the codename structure, PB Success. Arbenz fled. The mechanism would be rehearsed again. Indonesia, 1965, Brazil, 1964, Chile, 1973. Same script, different flags. Not every attempt succeeds, but it works often enough to become standard procedure. Today, the tools look different. Instead of bought newspapers, social media. Instead of street gangs, peaceful protests. Instead of direct bribes to generals, military cooperation programs. But the logic is the same. If a country controls a resource but does not control the system through which that resource is sold, it is vulnerable. And the question is not whether pressure will come. The question is when. SWIFT, sanctions, asset freezes, these are descendants of what was done to Iran in 1951 to 1953. Only now, you don't need a cruiser off the coast. One phone call to a bank can freeze a country. No ships required. And now, the receipt I promised at the beginning. After the coup, control over Iranian oil was formalized through an international consortium. Before the coup, American companies had 0% of Iranian oil. After the coup, 40%. The shares were divided like this: British Petroleum, formerly Anglo-Iranian, 40% 5 American companies, the predecessors of Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Texaco, and Gulf, 40% Shell, 14% the French CFP, 6% Iran received 50% of the profits, but 0% control over operations, pricing, and production volumes. On paper, partnership. In practice, a return to managed dependence. This is not ancient history. The documents are declassified. You can read them. The companies still exist, under different names. Some of them are in your portfolio. That is what it cost to overthrow a democracy. Not ideology, not fear of communism. 40% for Britain, 40% for America. Everything else was packaging, not in the form of blunt colonial extraction, but as a controlled partnership. It looked civilized, legally clean, and rational. That is how victory is often structured today, without occupation, without flags, without admissions. 26 years later, Iran will explode in the Islamic Revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini will point directly to 1953 as proof that the West cannot be trusted. The shadow of that coup fell across everything that followed, and it is still there. If you look at it coldly, one thing becomes clear. The coup was not a system error. It was a function of the system. The system could not allow a successful nationalization to become a precedent, because precedents are the most dangerous thing in any hierarchy. One working example spreads faster than any ideology. Democracy in Iran in 1953 did not lose because it was weak or naive. It lost because it tried to act inside boundaries controlled from the outside. It followed procedure, while its opponents controlled the infrastructure. This is not a moral tragedy. It is a structural conflict in which it is obvious in advance who has better odds. 3 lessons to remember. First, a resource without infrastructure is not wealth. It is bait. Second, legitimacy works only inside a system that recognizes it. Outside that system, there is only power and money. Third, the most effective coups are the ones that look like the natural flow of events. If you see a popular uprising against a leader who blocks someone's financial interests, look at the money. Always look at the money. And now the main question is not about the past, but the present. If you see a country trying to abruptly change the rules of access to a key resource, Without controlling the markets, the currency, and the infrastructure, what do you think happens next? It will look like a fight for justice, and it will end, most likely, as a counting. Democracy in Iran in 1953 was not destroyed in battle. It was judged inconvenient, and anything judged inconvenient in a large system is, sooner or later, sold. Most people think the era of these coups is over. After this story, you know the truth. Only the methods got cleaner. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And write in the comments, which country today would you call a new Iran? Resources are there, but control of the system is not.